So there has been for a long time a seasonality to the purchasing of hardware, and that existed up until about 2007 when we had the terrible economic crash, and that just destroyed everything. But we're now getting back on that track where you have a seasonality, and the peak is Q3, where the sales channels and the OEMs start to buy stuff to get it ready for sales in Q4. And then it falls off a little bit, and Q1 can be flat to low, and then Q2 is always very low, and that's when everybody's trying to get rid of their inventory to get ready for the next Q3 for the gear up.
And so, possibly their employees.
Well, yeah, and, yes, and unfortunately there is seasonality in certain level of employees that are not critical to the design, development, and so forth of the product. Now, that seasonality in the PC market has been fairly stable, with the exception of the recession I mentioned, over time, but it's been on a downward trend. So it's been seasonality, but downward seasonality. The initial idea or fear or conclusion was that, well, the PC is being cannibalized by mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. And that was the common wisdom for quite some time. However, in the last 2 years, we've realized that the smartphones and the tablets also are not selling as well as they used to. And that comes down to pretty much everybody who wanted a tablet now has at least one, many have two. Everybody who wanted a smartphone has one, two, or maybe three. People who wanted PCs have PCs. So what we're seeing is a stretch out in what's called the buy, B-U-Y, the buy cycle, or the refresh cycle of PCs. People used to refresh PCs 2 to 3 years. Now it's 3 to 5 years, much like what happened in the automobile industry, where people used to buy a car every other year. Now they buy it 5, maybe even 10 years. So you have a stretch out of refresh or purchase combined with an overall decline of market, which is today due to the downturn in the Chinese economy. The downturn in the Chinese economy has impacted mobile phones, tablets, televisions, PCs, and a variety of other things. Everybody has felt that. Now, is that the new norm? It quite probably is, because the Chinese economy was overhyped. We all know that. We've seen that picture before with Japan being overhyped. We've got our own overhype cycles in the United States and in Europe. And so we're reaching a point now where the Chinese economy is getting to a stable point. It's not going to be, you know, infinitely growing and growing at a 10% rate like it used to. And so we're just going to have to make some adjustments, some establishments, some corrections. And Intel got caught in that. You commented about Intel's layoff recently of 10,000 people, or 10% rather. And the problem there was that Intel was hoping that the economy and product sales would do better than they did do. Intel was hoping that it would see a bigger pickup faster on IoT. It was hoping that it would do better in the mobile space. And it was hoping that the PC market would stabilize and stop declining. And none of those hopes came true, unfortunately. And the net result was the balance of revenue to employee was just out of whack for Intel. They had to make an adjustment. I can tell you that it was not an easy thing for the Intel management to do. Intel has been a great company, very loyal to its employees. It hasn't had the up and down flutters that most other companies have had, that as soon as there was a problem, they immediately fired everybody. They kept their people for as long as they possibly could. But it really was out of balance. And so this is an unfortunate adjustment that any well-run company has to do.
You know, I think it's interesting you mentioned the automotive industry and how we've had our own, you know, you buy automobiles, we spend a fortune on them, and now we're buying fewer and
it's because they last longer, they're better built.
Yeah, they last longer and they're better built. But we're seeing sort of a virtualization, I'm thinking, in every industry. Like, you know, we're Uberizing everything, more or less. And so there's less need for all the little gadgets and ownership. And we're seeing a shift in software. A lot of heavyweight software that used to live on the computer, personal computers, now moves to the cloud. And we're even seeing virtualization of jobs and where you work, and that you work remotely and that sort of thing. And all of that leads to a lot less stuff, you know. So I think we're seeing a sort of a monumental change in our economy around the world, and we're having to adjust to that.
Well, part of it is subscription. You want to talk about that? Software subscriptions.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, but I hadn't really thought of it. But yes, you know, you
used to own software. You used to go out and buy software.
Yeah.
And it was yours, and you were stuck with it. And now, and Kathleen can speak to this more than I can, but all the major companies, Adobe, Autodesk, and so forth, Microsoft, they're now renting the software to you on a monthly basis.
Well, and I think that, well, that's true, and especially if we talk about the CG industry, you know, we see companies being able to ramp up quickly, rent the software they need when they need it, then they, you know, and they do it with the hardware as well. And as stuff goes to the cloud, you just turn on the processors, you turn off the processors as you need them, you turn on the software, you turn off the software as you need it. So yeah, I mean, that virtualization of everything that I was talking about is extending to just about every part of the business.
There's another component of that also, and there's a thing called a render farm. And when you're doing something that has a lot of rendering in it, such as making a movie or developing a game or doing a TV commercial, something of that nature, because it's a project and you know it has a beginning, middle, and end, you can project in a spreadsheet where your demand is going to be in terms of where you have to have compute cycles for rendering. And very often, studios and production facilities will say, okay, at this point in time, we're not going to go out and buy $2 million worth of servers that we're only going to use for this point in time. But instead, we'll buy some time on Amazon or Google's servers, and we'll go to a render farm who already has the software, and we'll say, okay, we want this many frames created for this project. And they do that, and they never have a capital equipment expense. They have a cap ops expense, but that's factored into the project. And so in the past, they would have actually bought that hardware and then tried to find some utilization for it between projects, which they never did, unfortunately. So now that gets evened out. Good news for the studios, bad news for the guys selling equipment.